yourselves and welcome to the Seahawks 360 podcast, a sports ethos production where we look at the Seahawks from every angle every week. I'm Candace Higgins,
I'm Tino Ganasius.
and we are here. We are in time for training camp. It has been a long road going through the season in terms of our predictions for the NFC West. And if you have missed any of our How the Seahawks Stacked Up series, please do go back and check that out. But we are moving forward. The veterans, as we record this on Tuesday, the veterans come in tomorrow, and the rookies have already been in training camp, but nothing has really seemed to come out of it. I think that's really more just orientation for those guys, more so than anything else. But the real work begins on Wednesday, and there is a lot to talk about in this very exciting regime. And I think there's probably more buzz about what's going to be happening in this training camp than there has been, quite frankly, in years, just because you knew what to expect with Pete Carroll. As great of a legend as he is, you sort of knew what you were going to get one way or the other. And there are so many questions for this team. And so because we are Seahawks 360, we'll get into some of the major headlines that we think flank some obvious things that flank the questions around around the training camp. But we also want to get into some other things, the things that maybe people aren't talking about, the things that I think could low-key make a big difference in our year. So let's get into it. I think we can probably break it up by offense and then go into some of the defense. I'd like to start off with some of the breaking news that came out on yesterday that guard center Connor Williams will be doing a tryout for the Seahawks today, or at least a visit is actually the specific language that was used, a visit for the team. I think the team probably will work him out, see how he's doing. From everything I've heard in terms of reporting from the major outlets, it sounds like he's still got a ways to go in terms of health, but this is his first opportunity really looking at the landscape of free agency. And this is particularly an unusual situation because Connor Williams is, quite frankly, one of the better guards in this league. He would be probably the top free agent of all of the interior offensive linemen who was available this year. He'd probably be the top candidate if he was healthy. I'm sure he would be sought after and on many teams, but he tore his ACL in December, and he made it known that he did not want to address free agency until he started to make some progress with his health. And so obviously he seems to be at that point. He specifically announced that he wanted to wait a while. And so here we are, the opportunity to sign a absolutely game-changing guy. If they can pull this off, my excitement level for this regime, which is already high, will go absolutely through the roof. What do you think, Tino?
So my first question is, do you like him better than Laken Tomlinson?
Of course. Of course. In fact,
No.
I love him because he would replace Laken Tomlinson. Just go ahead and give me a Williams jersey now.
Right. I believe he was out of the University of Texas.
Yeah.
A very athletic interior lineman. As you said, health issues have been what's been going on with him. Cowboys, Dolphins, right? Two very good running teams that he's come from. Yes, I think honestly, any sort of anybody who's going to create more depth on the interior, like quality depth on the interior line, is going to be huge for this team, right? And so if you make, whether it's Bradford or Tomlinson, or you give Christian Haynes the proper time to develop, whatever role Connor Williams would play is going to be a huge positive, right? I think the only player out of that group that I truly care about long term is Christian Haynes, and I think Connor Williams gives them the opportunity to allow him to develop properly and not throw him into the fire and stunt his development. I will say I like where they're at center. I think Williams would probably slot in more as a guard. I'm more confident in Olu and Nick Harris together than I am in names like Tomlinson and Bradford. So, yeah, I think this would be a great move. What's most encouraging is not just that it's Connor Williams, it's that they understand that this line is not ready yet, right? That they need to add more names to it. They're not standing pat. They're not, pumping up Tremaine Ankrum and guys like that, like they have in the past, right? They're bringing these names out of nowhere typically and saying, "Trust us, we'll develop these guys. We like these guys." I think this is different, right? We know we need help. And so
Right.
to me, that's the most encouraging thing is their willingness to admit a weakness or a lack of strength at a position and the willingness to address it. So yeah, I love it all around. I think Connor Williams is a very good player, provided health. Connor, it's the right position for them to look for help at. I'd like to see a tackle at some point, given that Abraham Lucas is starting training camp on the pup list. But let's start with the guard and go from there.
Yeah. Now I will say that Corbin Smith reported or at least mentioned on his podcast Locked On Seahawks that he's hearing that they're looking at him at either left guard or center at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So but because I honestly think that the right guard has enough guys in
Sure.
that rotation. They got some real competitive, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but they got some real it's a real competition at that place. But they really don't have anybody competing with Lincoln Tomlinson at the left guard spot. And
Right.
that's where he's played, where Williams has played
Mm-hmm.
most of his career. He did play center, and last year he was kind of all over the O line, but the year before that he played primarily center, if I'm not mistaken. Or no, I think he actually played primarily center this past year, and he had a really great year at center. I think I lean towards you though, and that I like the combination of Oluwatimi. I do like giving him a shot. Now, if Williams is what they feel like that upgrade is needed, I get it. If they fall short in training camp, you do have that insurance, but as you know, I prefer some competition at the left guard spot. Somebody who's not 52 years old, for example, and Conor Gregor is 77. So anyway, there's a lot to be excited about that. So one of my headlines was going to be the offensive line rotations and the battles within that. And
Mm-hmm.
now that potentially got even more interesting. This is just a visit, right? And nothing ultimately may come of it. But like you said, I like the mentality and I like the approach. And hopefully the Seahawks can find some kind of way to pull this guy in. It would be a huge deal.
Right. I agree. It does impact so I have a question or a headline for each group for the most part and for each group of coaches. But my offensive line question is, will Christian Haynes move up this depth chart during spring, or I almost said spring training, during training camp, right? So
Yeah.
it's to me, he's the wild card, or he's the player that can actually turn this from an average offensive line to a good one because
Mhm.
he has talent that I think some of the other players at his position don't necessarily come in with, right? That's why they spend a third round pick on him. But as you mentioned on a previous episode, you know, we see him second and third string right now, right? We're not seeing him running with ones. And I think that, obviously minicamp, it is what it is. But I am going to be paying close attention to Christian Haynes. He's one of the players that I'm most excited, new players that I'm most excited about with this 2024 Seahawks team, because I think they can use a very strong, nasty, athletic guard, whether it's run protection or pass, right, or run blocking or pass protection. He's a player I'm very excited about, and I want to see him start. I want to see him play. So to me, that's the big headline on the offensive line. That, and obviously, is Abraham Lucas going to be able to ever play football again? Those are the biggest questions that I have. And again, Christian Haynes is the player I'm most excited about.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with that. That was one of the things that I had down as well. Christian Haynes is the player to watch for sure. And a bigger question for me is because we've had some real uncertainty because of injuries in regards to where the depth chart truly falls. I mean, is Anthony Bradford, is he the presumed starter currently? And then is McClendon Curtis under him and then Haynes under him? I mean, that's possible. Or do they see
Mhm.
McClendon Curtis as the lead guy even over Anthony Bradford? So he has now been officially cleared for practice. That was revealed a couple of days ago. And so now that he's thrown back in the mix, like I said, that is a real competitive battle. And I'm really not sure how this team sees these guys. And one of my biggest concerns, and it may completely be not, I mean, it may not be relevant, but my biggest concern is does this team have a policy of not starting rookies?
Right.
Mike McDonald had a lot of vet guys kind of on that
Mhm.
team. There weren't
Mhm.
a ton of just rookies playing and getting play time. Is that a policy that he has? And if that's the case, does that put Haynes at a disadvantage? Or and if that is the case, will Haynes at least be given an opportunity in camp to show what he can do one way or the other? And now my hope is it ends up being like a Abraham Lucas situation where he sort of started on the bottom of the depth chart, and that is, pads came on and
Mhm.
training camp got going, that quickly changed. That's my hope. But you can't assume that just because Pete Carroll was okay putting in rookies and giving those guys a shot, that Mike McDonald will automatically be. That is yet to be seen.
Right. I agree. I think that's the overarching theme for me when I started looking at this team and trying to ask questions about training camp and things I wanted to see answered. The overarching theme is that this is the first year in so many years where we don't really know what any of the philosophies are.
Right.
We don't know what the offense is going to look like. We don't know what the run pass mix looks like. We don't know if this team is going to blitz a ton or is going to play, more a safer type of defense. We do based on what the personalities of the coaches that are brought in, but we don't know if they're playing rookies. We don't know if they're going to play all the rookies and say, you know what, this year we don't think we're competing for a Super Bowl. Let's get as much experience for these young guys as we possibly can. We have no idea. We don't even know if the top corner is going to follow the best receiver on the other team, or if they're going to stay with what Pete Carroll used to do and play sides. Like these really fundamental questions haven't been answered yet because we have no experience with these coaches. So I think it's fascinating. I'm going to be watching preseason. I think like I've never before, maybe since I was an 8-year-old excited for, Kurt Warner and those guys. I think that's the last time I've really truly gotten excited for preseason. But this preseason, I will. I want to see what Ryan Grubb's offense looks like, right? I want to see how much this defense blitz. For you, how much man defense are they playing in the back end, right? That's might be the biggest question of all. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, it's crazy. We don't have any answers. Zero.
Well, I will say this. I do think it's clear that they're not just going with young talent and resting on their laurels. They would not be seeing Connor Williams for a visit. They would not have re-signed Leonard Williams. So I do think that the front office has indicated that this team does feel like they're competitive and they can win. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to say win now, but they can win soon.
Right.
It's pretty much what they set themselves up. And so I think that part is probably the only thing that I think based on the moves that they've made this offseason, we can
Right.
safely say they're not going to just rebuild everything that you wouldn't have made the signings that you made at that point.
Sure.
But to your point about Abe Lucas and his health, I don't think the question is will he ever play football again. Now, I was there at one point. I really was, especially after Pete Carroll used the word chronic. But the word is that this surgery made a big difference, and you're not looking at anything chronic at this point. It's just a matter of getting him back from the surgery, getting him back, getting him in. I've seen some videos of him working out, which he did not have before. Like
Like the
he
Ben Simmons with Ben Simmons. Was he working with Ben
no,
Simmons
Abe
like
Lucas
that?
is not Ben Simmons. Yeah, those two are not the same. um, because we haven't seen it before from Lucas, I do think it's different than a Ben Simmons situation. I mean, because he could have posted that last year. He missed
Right.
the training camp last year, but he was, nursing injury even then. And so hopefully, at least for the immediate future, I think he'll at least play one more year. Now, will he have to prove that he can get on the field and stay on the field? Yes.
Mhm.
But I think he's in a better position where he had to rotate snaps with another guy. I think we're beyond that. But I think long term it is a question. He'll have a lot to prove this year in terms of his health. But I prefer them take this approach. I expected him to be on the PUP list to start
Yeah.
training camp because, to be clear, when you're on the PUP list at this time in the season, there are no minimum missing requirements. You can get off the PUP list at any time that you can pass a physical. So
Right.
to slow play him, it's probably the right. I mean, even if he was 100% healthy, I would probably want him to get in, get a look at the doctors, get some, some training built up, get,
Mhm.
get in the get it. be around everything for a little bit and then ease him back in slowly. Because when I want him on the field, I want him to stay on the field. And I don't care if he misses at least half of training camp. I
Mhm.
think I'll be fine as long as when he comes back, he can stay back. That's what I care about more for him.
My only frustration or criticism of their approach is that I would have liked to have seen a different backup plan than George Fant. I understand that George Fant started with the Jets. I understand that he has some talent. I think his best role is as that swing tackle, right? But I think the likelihood that Abraham Lucas plays, 3 or less games this season is not low, right? I just think well, listen, just to come in to be counting on Abraham Lucas and his talent to be a major part of this offensive line, I think is too risky for me. I want to see another option behind him, whether it's a developmental guy who you think could develop quickly or somebody investing more resources in your plan B at right tackle than just George Fant, right? Maybe it's investing a higher pick than the 6 that they spent on Mike Jarrell to be the developmental right tackle. Something that says to me that George Fant isn't the only backup option at right tackle because I'm not as confident as you. I think that when players have these chronic type issues, right? I think Joel Embiid is the only guy I can think of who was out for a couple of years and then was able to come back and play at a really high level. Like knees, especially for football players, as we know, are rough. So for me, I'm less confident, I will say. I love Abraham Lucas. I think he's a very good player. I think if you get 12, 14 games from him, I think we're lucky at this point in time. I just would have liked to see a better backup plan.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna disagree quite a bit with a lot of that. One, I do think we can see more than 3 games from Abe Lucas. If he could play last year more than 3 games, and he was absolutely at his worst last year, then I
Sure.
quite frankly think we can get more out of him than 3 games this year. Two, I'm just not sure where you're getting a better insurance policy than George Fant. And I'm not saying George Fant is some world beater, but I don't think you're just gonna have an all pro or Pro Bowl caliber guy who's just going to be okay being an insurance policy. I just think that's the reality of the situation. Who are you
I'm not
getting?
saying Pro Bowl though. I'm not even saying like I'm saying like starting caliber okay player. You can make the case that that's George Fant, and if the Seahawks think that that's who George Fant is, so be it. I don't think that's who he is. I maybe it's my memories from
He
when he was.
started with the Jets
Yeah,
a
but
lot of
he started
games.
with the Jets because everybody was hurting because they spent a top 6 pick on a tackle from Louisville that didn't work out, right? That's why he started. It
But the
wasn't
point is,
because
he's
they,
serviceable.
but they
You
didn't.
need a serviceable guy. That's what you need.
Right. And my question is do you believe he's serviceable?
He is serviceable. He's proven he's serviceable. Has he proven that he's a world beater? No, he's not. I mean, he's an average backup. He's an average backup. He's actually a really good backup. He's an average starter. An average starter was the most you were going to get in this market. And while it would be nice to have a tackle at a higher premium position, the reality is your interior offensive line was the much higher priority because you had bigger holes there. So
Sure.
you had to address that before you address the tackles. And the board fell in a way that allowed for you to get somebody. Yeah, maybe
Mm-hmm.
instead of getting one of the corners that could have got a tackle, but it'd
Mm-hmm.
still be a late round pick. I mean, even if you did that, I'm just not sure what they could have done better
Right.
realistically, right? When you're
I,
looking at the landscape of the real options that were on the table,
mhm. So
what they could have
I
been
look.
better.
So PFF had him as the number 8 tackle coming into free agency. Here's what I'm saying. I'm saying that I would have put more resource. It's an important enough position to me that I would have put more resources into that position in order to solidify, knowing that, you know, Abe Lucas might not be my long-term solution because of his health, right? Maybe Abe Lucas is like, if he comes back, that's great. We find a place for you, but we're not going to count on you to be our starting right tackle without a high quality replacement in case
That's
you're
as
not.
high quality as you can get in this league Really, I mean, seriously, like if you're not paying big money,
I'm saying
I
pay
think
big
it would be
money.
silly to
I'm
pay
saying
big money.
I would have considered paying big money is what I'm saying. I would have considered because you don't know if one of the important positions on your offensive line is
But how
going
are
to
you
be okay.
selling? How are you selling that to the player in free agency?
You're going to start. I would just say you're going to start. And Abe Lucas, if he comes back, is a luxury, not a requirement. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but if you already guaranteed the other guy that he's starting, then you've automatically benched Abe Lucas and he gets no shot and he just loses a year of development.
Sure, or you
This
get a
is a
guy
really
like
critical year for him. I
or
think
you get a guy like a Mike Onwenu, again, Michigan guy, who played guard and tackle for the Patriots and is a high quality offensive lineman. You throw a good amount of money at him, and he can play guard if Lucas is healthy, and he's a very good right tackle if Lucas isn't, right? That's the kind of solution I'm talking about. I would like, again, this is the run history, this is the Michigan stuff coming out, but I just think offensive line is incredibly important. And if one of your quality offensive linemen, well, there are question marks about his health to the point where we don't know if he's going to have a 4-year career or a 12-year career. I think that's something you really do truly have to invest with
not
something
this,
more than a
this
former
year,
tight end.
not this year. Not this year. I think you give Lucas a shot to see if he can improve or not. I think you've done enough to get insurance policies. That I mean, if it's a disaster, you can make a trade line. You can make a deadline a
Sure.
trade at the deadline, right? It's not like all of your eggs have to be in this basket right now. I think you've gotten a good insurance policy without potentially over investing money and wasting. I think that would just be mismanagement of your roster. If you can get a high quality a player with the upside of an Abe Lucas on his rookie deal, that's your
Mhm.
preference to pay at that position when you may not have to is it's quite frankly just gross mismanagement from a player development perspective as well as from an assets perspective.
Right.
Doubling down on something you already have that if it blows all up, I think they could do something at the deadline and
But
George
we don't
fan is
see.
hurt or he just looks like he's unplayable for some reason. And then you got your depth. They're not looking up. They're not showing up. I'm not sure you can
Mhm.
get much more of a disaster than you had last season, though. So
We don't see trades in football that often. To me, that's not my out. My out is not I'm going to make a trade because we just don't see them happen that often. He missed 11 games last season. He missed I forgot how many games he missed the season prior. We
he
can
did miss a
agree
lot of games like the season before.
to
But
disagree on this. Again, in my opinion, the offensive line is very important.
it
And
is. I agree.
I would divert more resources to ensuring that my right tackle is somebody who I can trust from a health standpoint and from a talent standpoint, more so than George Fant. That's all I'm saying. And
Yeah,
again,
yeah, we disagree on the
we'll see. Okay,
if
so
you're
let's do this.
underrating George fan
So
a little bit.
we got to do our weekly bet. What's the over under on the number of games Abe Lucas appears in this season?
8.
I'll take the under
Okay.
on me. I'll take
Yeah,
the under
I'll
on
go
that.
over. I'll go over.
All right.
I'll go over on 8.
What are we
I
putting
think.
on
What did he
this
play
one?
last year?
6, I think is what it said.
I think you can do 8. I do. I think. I mean,
But your
and
voice
even and
changed
even
when you
if you're
said
and
it,
if
though.
you're wrong, I just think you're pretending like George Fant is like Stone Forsythe or something, and I think that that's
He
a huge
close. Hey, he
upgrade
close.
from
He
what we saw
close.
last year. Like, I'm not sure it's worth. I think if this doesn't work out this year,
Uh-huh.
you're right. Their top priority needs to be replacing Abraham Lucas, and George Fant is not a long-term solution, but I
Mhm.
think it's presumptive to make a long-term solution where you already might have one on the roster. So
Okay,
that's kind of where I go.
sure. Operative word is might, right? And
You never know anything.
it's
Everything
a
is a toss
question
up
of
in this league.
it's a question of health, and his health has so far proven to be below average. But
He had a bad year, so did Daryl Taylor. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a Daryl Taylor person, but he did
mhm,
come back and have like numbers the next season. And it wasn't, you know what I mean? Like we were worried at one point that Daryl Taylor wouldn't play because he missed his entire rookie year. He had a red shirt that year. But there were big questions about the way he handled his leg injury. Would
mhm,
that have long-term effects?
mhm.
And ultimately, from a health perspective, he was fine. So I'm just not sure that the 1 year is enough to hit the panic button.
I don't remember them using the word chronic though with his injury either.
They were concerned
Or there was
long-term
also not,
span.
and there wasn't the vagueness around the injury either. That's the other thing about Lucas's injury that scares me is we don't really know details, right? They've been vague about it the entire time, which says to me there's more going on than what they've actually told us. But again, we just spent 10 minutes on Abe Lucas. That's my fault.
He
I
is he
like
is he
to,
is a critical piece though. I'm not
Mhm.
I'm not going to pretend like he's not. He's a big deal in terms of the upside of this team. If you're going to hit your ceiling, you
Yes.
need Abe Lucas. I
Yeah.
think there's no question about that. No question.
Well, you need a
Also,
right tackle.
speaking of ceilings,
Mhm.
I'll transition to
All
my
right.
other headline, which is JSN. And I know a lot of people are going to be talking about him just because of the production. But for me, I'm just curious to see, is he going to take that number two spot? Is he going to prove he can play on the outside? Or is he just going to be the slot guy? And I think either way, you're in good hands. Don't
Mhm.
get me wrong. I think if JSN did nothing but just be a monster slot, Cooper Cup kind of guy, the Seahawks would be fine.
Mhm.
But with Tyler Lockett, there being questions about his decline, what can he do? Will there be a missing piece, or can JSN sort of fill those shoes right now? Or does he need another year or so in order to do that? That's something that I think will be big time and pretty exciting to watch because, like I said, either way, it's a win-win. I don't think you have anything to lose,
Right.
but Tyler Lockett gotta watch his back for sure because JSN is coming, no question.
He does, and he already took a pay cut, right, to come back
Yep.
this season. Lockett did. So
Yep.
that to me answers the question of whether Lockett breaks camp with the team. I think there was a question about that before he took the pay cut, um, whether he was worth what he was getting paid.
Yeah.
In my opinion, that was something that I saw floating around. Could he get traded? Could he get cut? I think taking the pay cut means, barring anything unforeseen, he does break camp. Obviously, either of those two players can play in the slot a bit. I think you're right. The first point that you made, which is I think we see JSN get more comfortable in the slot. I think we see JSN play a lot more in the two wide receiver sets if they're going to run those, that maybe Lockett doesn't play all the time in the two receiver sets. And then potentially next year they transition to JSN being more of an outside receiver. But I think you're right that we're going to see a big step up, right? He had an injury in training camp last year. They said it hindered him a bit. Obviously, he was kind of just out there running on talent, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't, he's known for his route running and his precision and his hands. And we saw some of that, but I think he's just scratching the surface. Um, it would not surprise me for him to become the Seahawks' second elite receiver,
Okay.
NFL wise, this season. He has that kind of talent. I don't know if that's what's going to happen. They need a right tackle to be able to protect enough to be able to throw the ball. I'm kidding, but I think that he is supremely talented and a technician. Um, and I think he's so good and so talented. I don't know that Tyler Lockett will be a hindrance to him taking off at all. If JSN is open, he's open, right? What's more interesting to me is philosophically, is Ryan Grubb's offense going to run, like, what are the routes going to look like, right? Is Lockett going to be a player who is going to take the top off of defense and not get the ball that much? What is DK's role going to be? Is he going to run a ton of go routes? Are they going to try to utilize him with other routes? Is JSN a technician over the middle, or are we going to incorporate him more on the outside? I think this is purely Ryan Grubb's call, and that's going to be what's interesting to me is going back to the all 22s and seeing like, oh man, I haven't seen a route like that from the Seahawks before. Oh, or what is he doing? That's wild, right? Because he did a lot of that at the University of Washington. So to me, Ryan Grubb's the one who decides the future, I think, of all three of those receivers in many, many ways.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point because I think it's clear that Mike McDonald got somebody that he felt like he could just sort of give the reins over to, and
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's what he's doing. Um, I think that's an interesting point. In my mind, the best case scenario for really, for both of them, but I would say for JSN in particular,
Mm-hmm.
is that they're interchangeable in their roles. Him and Tyler Lockett, both him and Tyler Lockett, both of them can play well over the slot. Both of them can be a safety blanket. Both of
Mhm.
them can take the top off the defense. I think you'd love to see both from
Mhm.
JSN from a long-term perspective. And
Yes.
I think kind of like its value increases if he shows the ability to be interchangeable in that same way that JSN is. And kind of like it's always been interchangeable. So that's not, it's not, you're not asking anything that you haven't seen already. He's already been a kind of a do what you need kind of guy, basically.
Mhm.
But if both of them can show the ability to do both, then I think that increases both of their value long term. Maybe more so for JSN, but short term for Tyler Lockett, because then you've got a reason to keep him on this team because that interchangeability, that not knowing who's going to be where is already something that Grubb likes to lean into.
Mhm.
And so does Mike McDonald. If you have the players who prove that they can do that, that's all the better.
That's a I agree. And I think that the what's interesting too is um once you get past Tyler Lockett and you start to get into the Derek Youngs and the Jake Bobos of the world, the D Eskridges, those guys are not they're not positionally flexible, right?
Yeah.
Bobo can play inside and outside, but he's kind of a big slow dude with good hands, right? Who can win some 50-50 balls. D Eskridge is a slot, pure and
Yeah.
simple. He's not playing outside. Derek Young is it's when you have Lockett and JSN and they can flip flop, the defense has a much harder time determining who's where and why, right? Whereas again, you get predictable with some of the other guys. So I think his presence is very important unless we start to see, more two tight end sort of stuff or even two backs. We just don't know, right?
I
We just
think
don't
that
know what
surprised me. That surprised me.
it depends because the Jake Westover played in the backfield as an H back in that UW offense a ton, right? He was a player who was incredibly important to the University of Washington offense, and I don't know if that was a product of Westover being good or a product of Grubb believing in having that guy on the field. I don't think they have that personnel wise right now on this team, but it's a wild card. We just don't know. But yes, I think the versatility of Lockett and JSN to be able to flip flop at any point in time is something that he will take advantage of and something that makes Tyler Lockett's presence, I won't say required, but it's a value add
Yeah.
that both have that flexibility.
One of the insights I've gained is how often Grubb ran 11 personnel.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of similarities between that Washington offense talent wise and what the Seahawks do, and just how they structured it, paying Noah Fant and how they let go Will Dissly, how they let go Kobe Parkinson.
Sure.
I think speaks to the fact that they plan on having one main guy and having him leading targets. And they've got some serviceable guys that they feel like can come in and contribute, but
Right.
that they don't necessarily plan on. I don't think that the Italians will be nearly as big of a factor. And to be frank, I think that's a good thing because I think that the Shane Waldron struggled to highlight both the tight end sets, which I think was a great part of his offense, but
Mm-hmm.
also balance that with making sure your receivers got ample targets. And some of that had to do with pass protection, granted, but I just think, JSN wasn't utilized correctly. I think Tyler Lockett could have been put in better position. Quite frankly, the whole offense could have been better used from taking advantage of the three-headed monster that you have at wide receiver.
The one thing I like coaches that they have a philosophy, but they allow their philosophy to change based on personnel and talent.
Right.
Part of why so Ryan Grubb came up, with the running game and the offensive line. Part of why I think he ran three wide receiver sets was Jalen McMillan was a third round pick. Jalen Polk is a high second round pick, and Rome Odunze is a first round pick, right?
Mm-hmm.
And their running backs were, Dylan Johnson was a transfer from Mississippi State, but he wasn't that explosive or talented. He played well, but I think part of it was the talent that he had. So I'm still I won't say holding out hope, even though I love the running game. I'm more saying like I think that he is good at evaluating what he has and playing to it. And I think because he has those three great receivers, I think we will see him go through a lot of three wide receiver sets. But because he has two very good running backs as well, we'll see him also be able to run the ball. But I think you're right that the two wide receiver sets we won't see as much because that's not where the talent lies.
Right.
we would see more of the three wide receiver, one running back, sort of, 11 personnel sort of stuff.
For sure. Okay. Any other offensive? Oh, well, I did have one more that I wanted to get. And we're actually it fits right on topic. I
Mhm.
was wondering if Farrell Brown is a true tight end too. I think that's a legitimate question. I think he might be. It's possible he's more of a tight end three.
Mhm.
And they've slated him as a tight end too, but I think that Barner could take him. Honestly, like I saw the video of him, and it's just a video, but him
Mhm.
like doing exercises or whatever, and
Mhm.
on the off season, and he looked insane how he ran. Like I'm just like, what kind of form is that?
Right.
So anyway, he's definitely a journeyman, no question about it. And I just wonder,
And this-
I think that's a sneaky underrated
mhm.
storyline
It's
that
a good question
yeah,
because in my opinion, I think they play if they want a threat, a receiving threat out of the tight end two, you might see Barner a little more because he's a
yeah,
little bit better of a receiver. I think if they are really trying to run the ball or they're not worried of they don't need that tight end two to be a receiving threat in that particular play, then you see Farrell Brown. I think that's he
mhm,
was drafted or not drafted, he was signed for his run blocking ability.
yeah,
And so he's functions more, I'm assuming functions more as a sixth lineman, right, at times than he will as a threat. And so to me, it's
right,
more, those both they'll be tight end 2A and 2B, and
yeah,
it'll be based on what the situation is more so than one being ranked above the other. That would be
that's
my
fair.
assumption.
Yeah,
But I do think it's interesting that, that, and you're right, I think we see a lot more 11 personnel because they don't have that true tight end too. They don't have that guy that's a threat. We may see more of it, more two tight ends next or 2 years from now when Barner's developed and more comfortable, or maybe Barner's more talented than they thought, and he comes in and immediately is a threat, and we just see him
right.
take over. That wouldn't surprise me either.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's something interesting that nobody's talking about that I think will, make a difference in the personnel package that you see and all of that. Because I do think they'll base around we talked about, they'll base it around the personnel that they have, but the
Right.
guys got to step up and play, no question about it. I think the same thing holds true for Kenny McIntosh. I'm
Mhm.
not sure he's guaranteed a third running back slot. I think Halani, people
Mhm.
like him and
Mhm.
people think he could come in and potentially
Mhm.
rank him. So you are people.
Yeah.
It's people. He raises his hand as people. And so I think that's another just sneaky underrated battle that nobody's going to be talking about. And
Mhm.
I understand why, but I think it's important and could change again the ceiling of this team.
The running back question I had was I really do wonder what the job share will look like between K9 and Charbonnet because
Right.
Charbonnet showed out last season in his
Yeah.
opportunities, right? And ran with power that we haven't seen since probably Chris Carson.
Hmm.
And I like that, right? But I also think that Walker needs touches to get warm. He
Yeah.
needs to feel the ball, right? He's a kind of a touch and feel type of runner. And so it'll be interesting to see what that job share looks like, right? Is K9 going to be able to get loose enough if he has to split carries with Charbonnet? B, what does this offense look like with those two styles of running backs? Meaning, is Charbonnet going to be the short yardage guy? Do they both play catch passes out of the backfield? Right? Will the Seahawks take more advantage of K9's ability to catch the ball and run in space than they have in the past? I think all those things are interesting, and I'm very fascinated to see if Charbonnet. They spent a second round pick on him. Is he going to have a bigger role in Ryan Grubb's offense than he did in Shane Waldron's offense? I wouldn't say it's incredibly impactful because I think both guys are effective. I think both guys are very good, but it is something of interest to watch because if it's Charbonnet, you're not seeing a ton of outside runs, right? He's going to be between the tackles. If it's Walker, there's a little bit more versatility, but we'll see
The
with those.
best case scenario in my mind is if they can come up with something equal or kin to what the Cleveland Browns did with Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. And I just pulled up their snap counts. And so in 2022, they had Chubb running 56%, of those offensive snaps, and they had Hunt on 41, which I think is a pretty even divide. You still have a clear lead back, but you also have a really
Sure.
your strong high usage number two.
Hmm.
And I think that's probably a very good scenario. No, not necessarily from a depth perspective, but from a explosive offensive perspective, I
Hmm.
think that would be really fun to see.
I agree. And it's a way to keep them both fresh, right? We all know,
Yeah,
unless you're prime Adrian Peterson, it's not smart to give a guy, 100% of the work.
yeah,
And so I think that will be moving forward, that will be super important to watch to make sure that we can keep those guys healthy.
right. Okay, let's move to defense.
All right.
So, in my mind, one of the bigger headlines that I think everybody's kind of talking about is going to be Draymond Jones. No question about it.
Mhm.
He's taken some heat from the franchise. I am a Draymond Jones apologizer. But nevertheless, it will be interesting to see because right now he's not slated to start at either position, and I think there is valid criticism. If you're gonna criticize something about the Draymond Jones contract, I think it's fair to say, well, he's getting paid a lot for him to be a starter. And right now, he's not slated to start with the interior, and he's not started to slate on the edge either. Now, from a depth perspective, do you love having Draymond Jones as a rotation guy? Yeah, sure. I think it's probably some of the best you can get because he is a starter caliber type of player.
Mhm.
But and let's just see if he can do something with those edge snaps. Last year, mixed results with him on the edge, but he was no question thrown into the fire with him spending some time to focus on that and seemingly losing a fair amount of weight. Does that help his explosiveness or does it hurt him, especially when it comes to him getting some snaps on the interior?
Mhm. It's so I think he showed up to minicamp at 265, somewhere around there, and he's listed weight as 281.
Mhm.
Obviously, that was an attempt to add some speed and some quickness to be able to play outside. I think they will use him as a chess piece a little bit, like a queen, where they can move him around. Obviously, in pass rush situations. So there was, I just read, there was the second minicamp practice. He lined up opposite Leonard Williams in the dime, and then a few plays later, next to Williams inside in the nickel. Like I think they'll move him around a bit, and we know Mike Macdonald likes to have guys on the front that he can move anywhere, right? He wants the unpredictability. He doesn't want you to know where the blitz is coming from. So it might be the case that a player that's a tweener like Draymond Jones is actually more of a positive for Mike Macdonald because he likes that versatility, right? It's Leonard Williams, you can make the same case. He can be a really big end
Yeah.
or a pass rushing interior guy. They have players who are able to line up in both. And so I think his versatility will end up being a positive, or his tweener status will be a positive for Macdonald. That's the glasses half full perspective, right? The glasses half empty perspective is he has no real position.
Yeah.
He's too light to play inside. He's not fast enough to play outside. And we just paid him, to basically be a backup, which if the other players in front of him are playing that well, then so be it. You're going to bust on some free agents sometimes, especially ones out of Ohio State. Sorry, my apologies. But I think that he is, he's, if he adds something to this defense, that's great. I'm thankful. This is the opposite of the Abe Lucas situation, right? This is the situation where if he is good, awesome, right? If he gets 8 sacks, that's great. If he doesn't, there's still Boye Mafe. There's still Nwosu. There's still Daryl Taylor. I know you don't like it. There's still Daryl Taylor. There's still Leonard Williams. There's still Byron Murphy. The front seven is still going to be very good, whether Draymond Jones is a key portion of it or not. And so for that, I'm thankful that they have a plan and then a backup plan and then another backup plan for getting
Yeah.
pass rush and being stout in the front seven.
To your point, I think that is particularly important because one point I was going to bring up is that I think everybody is assuming that Jarran Reed will have a similar year in production wise that he had last year. And I'm not sure that that's the case. One, because he played an entirely different position that he actually might be better at. I think you could argue he might be better at nose than he was as just a three tech. So
Mhm.
there's that question mark. And then was that circumstantial, right? Like, if a guy has a career year this late into his career, is that a one-off?
Right.
Or do you get more of the other guy? Is there more of a regression to the mean? And I would guess that it's a little bit more of a regression to the mean. Not to say that he won't be good, but
Mhm.
it's possible that I think Reed would get the start. He would get the nod because of his leadership. But if his performance fell off, I don't think Mike McDonald will be afraid to insert Draymond Jones in some of those more interior line sets. So that's an interesting battle that no one will be watching. But I sort of think it's kind of Jaren Reed versus Draymond Jones from the interior perspective. And I think either way, you were going to mix in Jones on your rotation on the edge. But in terms of if he's going to start, I think it's going to be Reed's job.
I think that is a sneaky big question though, because we were surprised that Reed started on the inside because we
Right.
didn't anticipate that. And B, we're certainly surprised by his ability on the inside last year. I think in passing situations, absolutely. Right. Passing situations, I think we see a little bit of Reed, but we see a lot of Draymond Jones and we see a lot of Leonard Williams. We see a lot of Byron Murphy in base downs or running situations. That's why they signed Jonathan Hankins, right?
Yeah.
That's why a Cam Young is on the roster. So
Right.
there is a backup plan to Jaren Reed not being playing at the level that he did last season because it was
Right.
quite frankly a shock or a surprise
Yes.
that he was able to hold up the way that he did. Right? He's the prototypical size to be a three tech, but he's not the prototypical size to play over the nose. So
Right.
that's a really good point, and I think that that could be a big X factor in the success of or failure of this defensive line is Jaren Reed the same player he was last year? And do they have the replacement for him? That's a great point.
Yep. Definitely.
Um,
Um, what
I
do
have
you
a
have
question
questions?
about the edges,
Yeah.
or a headline, I guess. I want to know if I think the big one is does Boye Mafe have yet another level
Yeah.
that he can achieve? Because what we saw from him as a second year edge was darn near Pro Bowl ability, right? He
Yep.
was phenomenal last season. He had 9 sacks, a forced fumble, 2 fumble recoveries, put constant pressure um, on the quarterback. He was a beast, and he was able to hold up on that edge really, really well. Just a great all around edge. And obviously he played even better when Nwosu was in there because Nwosu was able to take a lot of that attention away. My question is, so you got 9 sacks from him, and you got 9 sacks from him. I don't know when the breakdown was from a game standpoint, but I do know that, like I said, he looked a lot more effective when Nwosu was playing. Are we talking about a 12, 13, 14 sack guy? Or was last year kind of his ceiling? I
Right.
I also believe he's going to be up or eligible for another contract pretty soon here as well. So that's going to be a question that the Seahawks are going to have to answer eventually. Is Mafe what is he worth to this team? So this is year 3, right? So they've got him under team control for another year after this. But this
Right.
is when you start to talk about extension. I think Mafe is going to be a very important, interesting piece strategically, like putting this defensive roster together. I think it comes down to does Mike McDonald love him or not, right? If Mike McDonald
Yeah.
loves him and says we have to keep him, they'll sign him for whatever the going rate is for an elite edge. But I do want to know, is there a dominant level to him, or is he going to be very, very good for a long time?
I think if there was ever a year to truly find out, it would be under a Mike McDonald type defense where he has shown the ability to maximize the players that he has, particularly on the edge. Like I said before, we've seen career years from Jadeveon Clowney, from Cal Van Noy,
Mm-hmm.
well, under him. And so if Boye Mafe is going to take another step, it's going to be with this sort of simulated pressure, never know what's coming,
Mm-hmm.
advantage under his belt. So I think it's very possible to be frank. I lean maybe 60-40 that he will be
Mm-hmm.
able to take another dominant step or at least be able to get to double digit sacks. I think he can do that for no question, assuming health is on his side.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that will be a big deal in determining the season. And another one that I would say is something to watch is Tariq Woolen.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that guy's got a tackle. if he's going to stay on the field, no matter how talented he is. I don't think Mike Macdonald's going to put up with poor tackling in the same way that Pete Carroll did.
Mhm.
This team is all about discipline. And now I will give Woolen that he was fighting through some injury. I think we talked about a shoulder injury that he sort of had that probably impacted some of his decision making and ultimately probably his effort at times.
Mhm.
But again, I don't think he'll be given that grace this upcoming year. I think he can, if he's put in good position, I think he can get back to all pro level numbers easily, quite frankly, because he had several dropped interceptions last year. Like it
Mhm.
really wasn't. I think when you really look closely at it, his biggest issue was tackling. It wasn't coverage. Sometimes he took a step back, but not really. That was more in zone for
The
one. And
way the way they're talking about him, I think they consider him a Pro Bowl caliber player and they expect him to play like that. They
yeah,
were talking to Leslie Frazier. They were talking about, is a corner going to follow, is CB1 going to follow wide receiver one?
mhm,
Are they going to play sides? And when they're talking about CB1, they're talking about Woolen. They're not talking about Witherspoon. And I think that part of that is because Spoon is going to be in the slot a lot.
right.
But and they also said, with some of the smaller receivers, say, against Tyreek Hill, it's not going to be Woolen, it would be Witherspoon in that kind of situation. But the fact that they talk about Reek Woolen in that way, the fact that it says to me that's how they regard him, right? And I'm not worried about my worry level on Woolen is probably at like a 2. And I think yeah, it is because I think he's that talented, right? And I think he showed that he was that talented his rookie year. And to your point, Pete Carroll in a lot of ways, let them do whatever they wanted, right? He was out there having fun, clapping his hands, blowing bubbles. Like even at USC, he was that dude. USC, he was like, come on, let's go. Let's have a good time. Mike Macdonald's not about having a good time. Mike Macdonald's about winning ball games. And I don't know that one approach is better than the other. Pete Carroll won a Super Bowl, so it's hard to be critical.
Right.
But a player like Woolen, who I think may have been a little less disciplined on the field last season,
Yep.
is not going to play that way. And I think he cares too much about being great to continue to play undisciplined football under Mike Macdonald. I think Woolen is one of the players that Macdonald was brought in to make better, right? I think if you were to target the type of coach you would want having coach him and the type of player you would want Macdonald to have in his defense, it is Reek Woolen in many, many ways. So I'm not worried about whether I have bigger questions. We haven't talked about inside linebacker yet. I have bigger questions about this defense than Reek Woolen, right? I think
Oh, for sure. It was an
cornerbacks
underrated.
are going to be
Yeah.
great.
It was an underrated storyline on my
Yes.
list. Sure, no question about that. But yeah,
Yes.
in general, I'm a little slightly more worried than you. But for the most part, I am with you. And I will say that Griff Sturgeon from the Seahawks Overload podcast made a good point, and that was that it may be possible that Pete Carroll he put his cornerbacks in position to be a part of the run game
Mm-hmm.
more often. But
Yes.
Ken Norton Jr. found a way not to have that be a thing. And you can
Yes.
easily just scheme that out
Item.
of
Mm-hmm.
your playbook. And the Seahawks just chose not to for whatever reasons they justified. And I mean, it may not even be a point in Mike Macdonald's new scheme. So that's to your credit, that is like a more reason not to be
Right.
concerned about it.
You know who couldn't tackle at all? One of the worst tacklers of all time, Deion Sanders. And
True,
Deion Sanders might be the best corner in the
true.
history of football, right?
True.
The corners aren't, mostly corners aren't paid to tackle. They're paid to cover. And
Yep.
so if you have to scheme a little bit to cover up, a lack of, to me, that's a criticism of the coaches, right? If
That's
you have
fair.
a player who's hurt and can't tackle very well, if
Mhm.
that's indeed what was going on with him, but they can
Right.
still put their feet in cover, then you got to compensate for that. You got to roll safety every once in a while up to the line of scrimmage to help him tackle. You got to make sure he's covered up to utilize what he does well. It's just, to me, that doesn't mean you have an excuse to not tackle as a corner. It just means you have to coach and figure out how to fix it, right?
His
And
safety
so
could tackle last year.
that's true. I'm sorry, I should have said safety. In theory, and on some other team, on some, some other team if you got a corner that can't tackle.
Okay, to your point, yeah, let's talk about the big dog in the room. I don't know that my panic level could be higher for any problem than it is for the linebacker problem with the Seattle Seahawks. I am gravely. You told me, I remember this. You told me that by training camp they're gonna have some other dudes in this building competing for snaps at linebacker, and here we are, man. Training camp has started.
They're
And we are
coming.
looking at John Radigan and Pat O'Connell, and I am in absolute panic and disarray because Jerome Baker and Terrell Dotson are both on the PUP list after not playing at all in the offseason. My head's spinning, man. Talk me off a ledge.
I,
Talk
I
me off a
can't.
ledge.
I can't. Honestly, I wish I could. I don't know. Do you know why the off ball linebackers are on the pup list? Did they give a reason?
They mentioned now I forget which one is which, to be fair. One is recovering from wrist surgery. I
Okay.
believe that's Jerome Baker.
Okay.
I want to say that Dotson did play a little, did some walkthrough. If I'm not, one of them did walk through at least at some point, but they're also recovering from some injury, and I can't remember what that other injury is. But there are lingering things that basically seemed like it happened. I mean, for them to be on public list, it happened playing football. So obviously, this is
Sure.
something that went from last season, and we're still dealing with it now, which makes
Mhm.
me feel worse. I don't
Yeah.
like it. Really does. Like it does give me no comfort whatsoever, and I can't. This drop off from starter to back might be worse than the drop off last year
Yep.
from starter to backup on the offensive line.
Yep.
Like seriously, it might be
Worse
worse.
than going to Stone Forsythe and Jake Curhan.
Yeah, at least Stone Forsythe was drafted. I
Yeah.
mean,
So here's what, if the two are healthy, or if one is healthy even, and you got to run a lot more, you're running dime often, and you're playing three safeties, right? Big nickel, something like that. If one is healthy, it's not the greatest situation, but they're talented enough. One of those two is talented enough to make it work okay, right? You're still running that guy to the ground. You're still exposing him to injury. They both have talent. If they're both healthy, it's not the worst situation in the world. I don't think it's, I've said this before, I don't think it's the long-term situation or the long-term solution, but
no.
it is a solution. Now, to your point, you start getting into the Pat O'Connells of the world and the John Radigans of the world, and you're at a talent deficit at that point in time, right? You got a couple of tryhards out there. That's not going to work. It's just not. At that point, you're trying to convert safeties into off-ball linebackers, right? That's why when I saw Jamal Adams get signed by someone else, it was, it took a little bit out of me because I felt like this was a good role for him and a good insurance policy. That bridge might have been burnt, but they need something. And I am very shocked that they haven't signed two more guys to compete with Radigan and O'Connell, right? Two guys at least with a history of playing decent linebacker. It's scary. You could have all the talent in the world everywhere else on this defense, and you do. Defensive line, edges, corners, you got top elite talent at those positions. And they might just be, if they get past that first level, they might just be able to run wild every team, right? Or you might, you're playing Detroit and Gibbs is going to have 10 receptions and 160 yards. Receptions, not rushes, receptions. Like
Yeah.
that's the situation we're in. That's the situation we're going to play against the Rams and the Niners, and they've got running backs that can catch the ball and can get off. It's you want Pat O'Connell chasing those guys around, right?
Yeah.
And again, maybe Mike McDonald can scheme around some of that, right? Maybe, but then you're putting the onus of that coverage on a average at best safety room.
Right.
Then you're talking about Rayshawn Jenkins and Julian Love, and I like those guys if the rest of the defense is good. But if you're gonna lean on Rayshawn Jenkins and Julian Love to cover big time running backs out of the backfield and to cover big time tight ends, you're exposing them in a way that you can't be, right? So yeah, I'm scared. I'm scared. I think that the plan to come into the season with those two and the rest of the cupboard absolutely bare was crazy. Um, I would like, unless scheme wise they're planning on playing those guys. But at this point in time, you're starting to think about things like, should we re-sign Quandre Diggs and allow Diggs to play one of those safety positions since he's unsigned, and then see if we can't move Jenkins into more of a closer to the line sort of position and run three safeties more often, right? That's the kind of solutions we have to start to look at. And to me, I don't know. It freaks me out because the rest of this defense is potentially so good.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
And then you're going to have, not for nothing, but like to see those guys as your linebackers and just getting, we saw Jordan Brooks and Bobby Wagner, a future Hall of Famer, exposed over and over again.
Right.
These other dudes, man,
Yep.
It's frustrating.
Yep.
It's frustrating.
To me, that is the biggest question and my biggest concern of the entire
Yep.
offense, defense, whatever, of the entire roster at this point.
100%.
This large gaping hole. And here's my bigger concern with this large gaping hole that exists on the roster is that everybody keeps saying, trust Mike Macdonald. He was a linebacker coach. Everybody trusts Mike Macdonald. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. All right, cool. But here's my question. Is that not a blind spot then?
Yep.
Can that not be a blind spot for him that because he was a linebacker coach, he
Yep.
feels like he could coach even the absolute
Anybody.
talent and
Right.
try to make that work? To me, my concern is that because he was a linebacker coach, he feels like he can take Joe Blow off the street, which is
It's
essentially
arrogance.
actually quite literally what is happening, and make him into some just, serviceable, functional guy. And
Right.
I think that's quite a bit of a stretch. That's why I'm not as high on the Tyrese Knight pick, because everybody's like, well, he's a linebacker coach. Well, one, he was the least informed of any draft class he's probably ever going to be. And he made that pick. And two, I feel like this is a guy who feels like he could take the rawest of talent and make them great, which is funny because I don't really have any core examples that he can take the rawest example and make them. The closest we have is Patrick Queen. But really the reality is what happened is they changed his position and when they got Roquan Smith, and that's what made Patrick Queen better. Not saying that
Patrick Queen was also a first round pick. He was also a first round pick,
correct.
Right?
So I'm just trying to figure out this narrative that everybody got that he's a linebacker whisperer. Tell me the linebackers that he whispered and made into like high level quality linebacker players, because I don't have a list and I haven't seen.
And the scary part for me, the most scary part is we went through years and years of the Seahawks can take any ball of clay on the offensive line, build them into quality offensive linemen because Tom Cable was our offensive line coach, right? And we heard that time and again, that Tom Cable could turn anybody into a great lineman. And we had terrible offensive linemen for years because they believed this, right? There's an arrogance about assuming that you don't need supremely talented players to build a supremely talented team.
Correct.
And there's you're trying to, some of the, playing on the edges or taking advantage of the margins, whatever it is we're talking about. Maybe they're trying to apply it here, but you can't be arrogant. You still have to have talent. You still have to have talent, right? And I think it is very scary to me. And I hope that's not what they're thinking. I hope they're not just dismissing off-ball linebacker because they have this. He is a very good coach. I saw him at Michigan take a lot of, like, Junior Colson was a good example of a linebacker. Michael Barrett, he did make some linebackers who were 3- and 4-star recruits into stars. He did do that, right? He does have skill, but I don't care if you could be Dick Butkus and you're not taking no Pat O'Connell and making him a quality starter. You're just not, right? Mike Singletary's not taking them guys there either. It's not smart football. And if we're talking about, allocation of resources, they needed to allocate more than a 4th-round pick and 2 one-year contracts to off-ball linebacker. They just did.
And at least make sure the 2 one-year contract guys were healthy.
Right?
At least
so I don't know. This is one place we do agree. My panic level at off ball linebackers at a 10.
Yep.
Because as
I'm
much
at
as I
12.
do like Dotson and Baker as players, I don't love them. I don't think they're difference makers, right? My hope is they can stop the run if you can keep the guards and center off of them. And the hope is that they can be average cover linebackers who are slightly better than what we had last season. That's like the best case scenario. But what happens if the interior defensive line can't keep the guards and center off of them, right? Then all of a sudden they get wiped out. What happens if one of them has lost a step and McCaffrey's going crazy and Kyron Williams is going crazy and Blake Corum is going crazy, right?
Right.
I don't know. Again, I love this defense. I think this defense is going to be top 10. I think this defense has potential to be top 5. I really do, between the coaching and the talent, but they got to figure something out at off-ball linebacker quick.
At least try somebody out. That would give me some hope that they, like they're doing with Connor Williams.
Connor Williams,
Try a guy out that say that you're still looking to improve this position. Now, here's my saving grace, and it's really my last hope that's preventing my panic level from being on 20, because that's where we're at. But the one thing that I have is that Mike Macdonald cares about winning a lot, and that when he sees this catastrophe on the field, because they have not had pads on, I think that might be influencing him and tricking him into thinking that these guys are dudes they're not. But when K9 starts eating up Patrick O'Connell, I'm hoping then we start seeing some tryouts. Then we start seeing them bring guys in this.
Gonna be like, hey, we need some help over here, right?
That's my hope, that when the pads get on and you're actually seeing what these teams can do to this low level of a talent. And even if you're gonna be high on Tyrese Knight, we can all say he's raw. I don't think anybody think he's ready to start at this point, which is what he would have to do in order to save this linebacker room at this point. And I don't think that's good for his development either. But that's my saving grace, that when the pads come on, if these pads come on and they don't start trying dudes out or making some signings or you don't hear trade rumors or something, I'm going to be extremely, extremely concerned. And it might, in my mind, overshadow the ceiling of this team, because the defense is in a lot of ways predicated on linebacker play. His scheme, and we've seen it.
Well, and I think part of what we expect from him is to create a more cohesive scheme and defense, right? Where players are interacting with one another. They're, lining up at the line and you don't know who's coming. You need to cooperate and be on the same page in order for that to happen. And we saw quite often with Pete Carroll's team, they would, there was a lot of miscommunication, and there was a lot of times where linebackers weren't in the right spot. And that's part of Bobby Wagner's value to Pete Carroll's team, was he got people lined up in the right spot at least.
Right.
So, that's another question. If both guys are out, who's got the green dot on the helmet? Who's the one communicating? Who's the one organizing this defense? I don't know that they have that guy. No. I think they expect probably Baker to be that guy, since he's more veteran than Dotson is. But what happens if both of them are out? So does
he gotta get some off-season reps for that? Like, doesn't he gotta play in the off-season to make that happen?
In theory, it's funny is I think Jordan Brooks, I know you wish we would have signed him. I think I was on the fence. I think that's a lot to pay for a linebacker, a lot of years. But imagine if it was Brooks plus Baker or Brooks plus Dotson. We'd be in a spot where we had a guy who could wear that dot, right? We had a guy who could communicate to everybody else. We had a guy that could tackle. We know he can tackle. And so I don't know. I think it's a spot where I was looking at the PFF off-ball linebacker free agency rankings, and you got to go down to 13 to find Tyrel Dotson. And Baker wasn't even on that list. You got Willie Gay, Jordan Hicks, Drew Tranquil, Blake Cashman, Josie Jewell, names like that, Devin White, all above Tyrel Dotson. That's not to say that PFF is always right, but it is to say that, if that's the guy you're counting on and he's not healthy and he was all the way down at 13, 14, it's nerve-wracking. and it's something they're gonna have to address. They're gonna
That's
have to
interesting.
address it.
I will say that's just real quick. I would say that that's interesting because they have him as one of the highest ranked off ball linebackers in terms of, like, I think he's like ranked at 89 or something by PFF. So I think that's interesting. It's probably about sample size. It's my,
Yes.
but I think that's a fair criticism too. So I
They,
don't know, man. I
he's
would say the story to watch is a linebacker position. Do we start seeing word about them wanting to improve that position as training camp gets underway?
Mhm.
God, I pray so. Otherwise, the Seahawks might be doomed. That's kind of where I'm at.
Mhm.
Anyway, guys, so that's really all the time we have for today. Tino, you want to wrap up with anything else real quick before we go close this out?
For sure. So you find me at Tino Junior 20 on Twitter. Ethos Mariners, still Mariners coming out of the break. Lots to talk about. Talked about the Major League Draft that just occurred. This team is a roller coaster, but you can find me there and just getting ready for, as I always say, getting ready for football season, getting that database all put together, and it's a lot of fun. Can't wait. Go
Absolutely.
Blue.
Be sure to follow the show at Ethos Seahawks. We'll continue to follow the training camp storylines. We put out what we're watching, and we'll see what actually happens. So be sure to check us out. But that's all the time we have for today. And as always,
Go Hawks.